现在订阅同盟会英语，不论找工作、升学或英检，表现更棒。快上
StudioClassroom.com。
现在请收听教学节目。
Advanced Studio Classroom is on the air. All aboard! Get ready to travel the world by train with Advanced. Hello, listeners. Welcome to Advanced Radio. I am your host, David. Today is April 29th, 2020, and we are getting ready to jump into our adventure article. I am not here alone in the studio. That would be very boring. I am joined by two lovely panelists whom I would love to introduce themselves now.
Hi, everybody. My name is Hazel, and we're talking about trains today. And trains are really fun. They remind me of the old days. And you see a lot of people traveling by trains in cowboy movies and things like that, and train robberies. So there's a lot of interesting things that have to do with trains.
Hey guys, I'm Pauline, and as you know, I love to travel. Basically any form of transportation I'm up for, especially if it gets me to a beautiful place. And there are a lot of beautiful train routes across the world that we're going to discover today, and I'm already having to add a few more to my list.
All right, right on. Well, actually, speaking of getting to beautiful places, my question for you guys today is, are there any special memories you have with any form of transportation? Today we're going to be talking about trains. You could share a story about trains or some other way that you've traveled that's been really memorable for you.
Well, when we were kids, every couple years we would cross America from the East Coast to the West Coast in a van. My mom fixed it up so it could sleep all six of us in the family.
Wow.
And so we would camp along the way and stay with relatives along the way, and those are the memories I have with my cousins because we didn't see them very often. So that was kind of fun.
That's a great
And I
story.
will add one more. I think my first field trip in school, we were in kindergarten, and we went to Union Station in Washington, D.C., which is a very famous train station, and rode a small train route.
Oh, that's so
that's
sweet. It sounds like a lot of fun. How about you, Pauline?
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, I've gotten blessed. I've been blessed to do lots of travel. One form of transportation that comes to my mind is boats. I love being on boats. And when I lived in Costa Rica, when I lived with Josh at his family's bed and breakfast and butterfly garden, that area of Costa Rica is rather remote. So when we would travel there or go back and forth to different places, we usually had to take a ferry. You'd fly into the capital city, you'd take this long bus ride to the coast, and then you get off the bus and then get on this hour-long ferry. And the ferry part was my favorite. I just love anything that has to do with the ocean. And sometimes you'd see like flying fish, or you could see the jellyfish in the water. One time I saw dolphins. I was always so excited about that. And also they had great music on the boat. One time I salsa danced with my friend on the deck. And I have all these great memories of all these different trips that I took with different people, the things we did or we saw on that boat on the way to.
How long was that ferry ride?
It was about an hour.
Okay.
Yeah, hour and a half. And I did it so many times that, like I said, I have a lot of different memories of it.
That's great.
Oh, that's a really great story. I was picturing, salsa dancing on a boat.
It was great.
Wow. I feel like, an hour and a half journey, that's just enough time for some magic to happen, So for me, actually, growing up, I've always really enjoyed trains, actually. And I've had some really good car journeys as well, visiting with my family on the other side of Pennsylvania. But one thing I really remember is when I went to school in a city called Philadelphia, which is about an hour and a half from where I grew up in Lancaster, PA. And I have a lot of memories of going back and forth on this train from college back home to visit my parents, stay for weekends here and there. And one of my favorite things to do was especially if I got on a train that had what they call a cafe car, meaning it was a little spot where you could go. There were tables. You could, buy some really overpriced coffee because, everything's more expensive when you buy it on the train. But it was worth it. You could sit there. They had bigger windows, more space, so you could kind of stretch out, bring a book, and kind of look out the big windows at all the different farms and fields going by. And there were some tunnels that you would go through. And the thing I really enjoyed was during different seasons, it would look different, So I've always felt like riding trains is kind of like watching a movie, a movie where nothing particularly happens, but like a movie nonetheless.
Well, it's funny that you say that because as soon as you start talking about it, I have all these different movies popping up in my head of all, especially a lot of older movies, I guess, where there's all these different scenes that happen on trains. So it just brings up all these stories.
Yeah. Well, that's what makes, that's what I love so much about trains, that it really kind of, all these forms of transportation we've talked about, all of these stories are all about how the journey can be as important as the destination a lot of times, It's not just about being there, it's about getting there too.
I think, too, when I was growing up, everybody had a train set. Mm-hmm. I mean, I remember thinking one time, I think that's the most valuable thing in our house is our train set because you can plug it in and it goes around and it smokes and things like that. So that's kind of a sentimental, memories and things about trains, kids growing up with trains. So it was before spaceships and things like that. So it was just a household item that everybody had a little train set.
Yeah. My sister doesn't have a functioning one that actually moves around, but I know like my little nephew, he loves trains. There's just something about trains that seem to just capture our imagination.
Yeah. So actually, without further ado, let's get into talking about some of these train routes. Let's capture our imaginations and see where some of these trains will take us all over the world. We're going to get into our first reading on page 42. It's going to be reading the introduction and the first route. Let's check it out.
Travel by train. Check out train trips to add to your bucket list. Traveling by train can be a romantic way to see the world. Since it was one of the original forms of mass transit worldwide, hundreds of pre-existing rail lines offer access to more remote areas. Here are some fantastic train trips to add to your travel bucket list. 1. Qinghai Tibet Railway. Where it goes. Xining to Lhasa. How long it takes. 20 hours and 55 minutes. Why not start with the world's highest train ride? The Qinghai Tibet Railway climbs to heart-thumping heights of over 16,000 feet as it snakes through the Himalayas. The gorgeous 1,215-mile journey only makes 7 stops as it passes through 4 different biomes. Booking between April and November bodes for better weather, though the stunning views of grasslands, wetlands, mountains, and deserts are always breathtaking.
We were just speaking off the air about how we were saying the word, so we were talking about train routes, right? But you can also say train routes. What's the difference between these two words, route and route?
It's the same word, spelled the same way, and the difference is it might give you a little clue of what region somebody is from, but it's also hard to say because some of us have lived in so many different parts of the States, or we have family members from different parts of the States, that it becomes also not necessarily for sure one region. It's just different speakers say it differently.
For sure.
I go back and forth between the two.
Yeah, me too, actually, depending upon what, which one I think sounds best in that situation. But yeah, so whether you say route or route, you are on the right track. What does on the right track mean, Hazel?
Well, it just means you're headed the right way. What you're doing is correct. Mm-hmm. And we think of a train always has to stay on the track. But it could go on the wrong track if you're not careful. So
right.
Sometimes we talk about the track of your mind, and
But now we're kind of getting off track, aren't we?
Exactly. We're getting off track.
Yes.
Yeah, we
Because
got to
getting
keep
off
track of what
means
we're
being
doing.
distracted.
So there's a lot of things about railroad tracks, a lot of idioms about trains.
Being on the wrong side of the track, although that's kind of different. Although, actually, in my hometown is a railroad, or is a big train town. There's a railroad system that goes through. I was also talking before the show that the sound of trains is very nostalgic to me because I grew up listening to them. But I have some friends in my little small town who are much older than I am, in their 90s, and I used to go over to their house and they tell me stories about growing up in my little small town back when they were younger. And it used to be that when you cross the tracks, the railroad, it was a different, it was the German side of town. And there was some tension between the different communities. So, you know, it harkens back to that when you talk about being on the wrong side of the track. Sometimes it has to be on a side of town that's considered maybe more dangerous or looked down on or something. And in my town, I actually had that for a while, though now it's just like I never knew it until I talked to them.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting how many idioms there are involving trains. And I think it kind of harkens back, Pauline used that word, when something harkens back to something, it just means it refers to it or it reminds us of another thing, right? But it kind of harkens back to the fact that trains are a big part of our imaginations. They're part of this. They're kind of a romantic way to see the world, and it traces back quite a ways. It's one of the original forms of mass transit worldwide.
Yeah, exactly. And I was thinking that's also probably why we have so many idioms about it, right? It's because it's been around for a really long time. So there's been plenty of time to develop a whole subset of phrases and ideas around it. But yeah, and then also because of that, we said earlier, there's all these movies about it. We have certain parts of the United States that we associate with trains, like Hazel was saying, I definitely think of the West and old Western movies. And when I do road trips, I used to do a lot of road trips too, like Hazel, but I lived in Montana. It's in the West, and you'd always see trains as you're driving out on these roads where you're in the middle of nowhere. There's, you know, it takes you hours before you get to another town, but there's a train going by. So yeah, trains have been around forever, and they do just bring up a nostalgia.
Yeah. And when we say mass transit, we're talking about forms of transportation that can transport masses of people, right? It's kind of like public transport is another way that you could say this word. And so we're going to be talking about these different train routes now. And Pauline, thank you so much for kind of opening up our imagination about kind of all the ways that trains show up in art and life. And again, that really resonates with me because I love trains so much. But we're going to talk about some train routes for us to add to our travel bucket list. I'm sure that a lot of people have heard this before, but Hazel, could you remind us, what is a bucket list?
Well, a bucket list is a list of things you want to do before you die or before you kick the bucket. So kick the bucket is a phrase people use about death, you know. Oh, did that person kick the bucket? Yeah. Or one day I'll kick the bucket, and that means to die. So I've never really liked this phrase a lot. I just think it's a list of things you want to do in life is another way to say it. But people have adopted this phrase, and it's fun to say. It's on my bucket list.
It's on the right. Yeah, there's also a lot of interesting idioms for passing away. Kick the bucket, buy the farm. That's another one, but we won't go. That's another advanced article. Now, our first train route, right? Our first train route to talk about is the Qinghai Tibet Railway. So, where does it go, Pauline?
I have no idea.
Oh, it's cool.
No, I do know. I'm just looking at the words and I don't know how to pronounce them. Xining to Lhasa?
Yeah.
Right?
Xining to Lhasa. Lhasa.
There's a lot of foreign names and places today.
For sure, yeah.
Friends, listen to the advanced readings for the most accurate pronunciations we can do.
Yes. And that route will take 20 hours and 55 minutes. Now, what makes this train so special, it seems, is it goes so high. It reaches such altitude. How high does this train climb, Hazel?
It climbs, I'm looking 16,000 feet.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. And so it's the highest, and it also snakes through the Himalaya mountains. So very high region, and to snake means kind of go one way, then turn, then the other way, and then turn back. And so you've probably seen highways or little roads that snake through the mountains. And that's actually what this railroad track does. So that
Very
must be an amazing, windy track and route to take.
Yeah, kind of reminds me of that song, "She'll be coming around the mountain."
There you go.
There you go. That might
Get
be
your
about a train.
banjo.
I think I think it's also about a train. Yeah, it is also a great banjo song. But banjos aside, this gorgeous 1,215-mile journey actually only makes 7 stops. You know, like the metro, the MRT, it goes, how many miles is it from Danshui to Xindian, right? Or something like that.
Right.
And there are tons of stops, right?
Yeah, I was thinking that just gives you an understanding of how remote these areas are, how many remote places you're going to see along the way. It gives you a real sense of that. Plus, then also it tells you more about those areas you're passing through. It says you actually pass through 4 different biomes. And that's really interesting because those are like very special, unique environments, whether that's the weather and the plants and the animals, it's going to look vastly different. And I think that's really unique to get to pass through so many different unique environments along the way, ecosystems.
Yeah, absolutely. And when is the best time to book these trips, Hazel?
You want to book the trips between April and November because that bodes, that calls for better weather. All right? And there'll be stunning views of grasslands, wetlands, mountains, deserts, and it's always breathtaking.
And I think that's actually the 4 biomes they were talking about.
Probably
That gives
so.
us the example of what we mean by biomes is wetlands. Obviously, wetlands and deserts, quite different.
Quite different, yeah.
Very, very different.
And mountains and grasslands
And mountains
are different
and grasslands.
as
So
well.
that gives you the idea of what we're talking about biomes. We're talking about just night and day differences in the geography,
Right.
the plants, all of that.
And you probably get a lot of night and day, too. It's a long trip.
Yeah.
You get a little bit of both, don't you?
20 hours and 55 minutes. So that sounds pretty cool. I think I would be particularly interested in just seeing the difference between going through a wetland and then going through a desert. It'd be so interesting to see both of those in one trip.
It seems actually like a pretty quick trip, 20 hours to go more than 1,000 miles.
Yeah, well, you're only making 7 stops. So
I know,
guess
but you're
that's-
snaking around in high altitude. It might be a little scary.
Yeah. All the more reason to put it on your bucket list.
That is one thing. I prefer not to travel on super fast trains. Well, here's the thing. If my point is to get to a spot, man, Taiwan's bullet trains are fantastic. And I'm never complaining that it gets me there so fast. Because usually I have a reason I'm trying to get somewhere and I only have a short amount of time. And then those bullet trains are just a godsend. However, for as a travel experience, I'm always hoping it doesn't go too fast. Because if it starts to go too fast, you almost can't really catch what's going on outside. You're just whizzing by so fast. So I prefer it to be slow enough that maybe I can take a couple pictures and really feel the outdoors.
Yeah, there used to be, and probably still is, Tuwalian. From Taipei, Tuwalian is a very nice, used to be an old-fashioned kind of train trip.
Yeah.
I don't know if they still have that. Oh, yeah, maybe they do. Tuwalian, yeah.
Yeah, slow
I think
train.
there's also one up to Shifen, up that direction.
Okay, yeah,
I'm
there's
actually hoping to do that sometime
There's
soon.
still some old trains that are
Nice,
kind of fun.
nice. Well, as you can see, there are plenty of train routes in your own backyard you can take. But without further ado, let's check out some of the other amazing train routes elsewhere in the world that we can ride on and have some beautiful travel memories with.
Two, Eurostar. Where it goes. London to and from Paris. How long it takes. 2 hours and 15 minutes. Eurostar is a popular way for folks to get from London to Paris or vice versa, thanks to its quick travel time. But it has another draw that makes it a great bucket list train trip. For 20 minutes, you'll actually be riding 150 feet underwater through the famed English Channel. Trains leave from St. Pancras, King's Cross in London and arrive in Gare du Nord in Paris. 3. Orient Express. Where it goes. Paris to Istanbul. Original route. The Orient Express is one of the most famous train journeys in history, with movies and murder mystery novels undoubtedly adding to its mystery and intrigue. In its early decades, the Orient Express was the epitome of luxury travel, with high society and royalty riding its rails. Many people believe the name references a certain train, but it actually refers to a train route. You can still ride its original route, all of which is included in a Eurail Global Pass. 4. Trans-Siberian Railway. Where it goes. Moscow to Vladivostok. How long it takes. 7 days. The Trans-Siberian Railway is another historically famous railroad that should be on your bucket list. It's also the world's longest continuous railway, clocking in at 5,772 miles from Moscow to Vladivostok, Russia. That's about a third of the way around the world. Along the way, you'll pass through 8 time zones and have plenty of time to see the beautiful Russian countryside.
Okay, so our next exciting train route is the Eurostar. It takes you from London to Paris. One big European metropolis to another.
Yes.
And we often think about trains in Europe, at least I do, because I've always heard about the Eurail Pass and being able to travel around Europe on the rail system. Mm-hmm. And it might be that this one is connected with that as well. Mm-hmm. But the really special thing, the reason that they point out this one in particular out of all the trains going around Europe, is that this one, for 20 minutes, will actually go 150 feet underwater through the famed English Channel. Yeah. That is crazy to me. People, you can't go scuba diving that deep unless you have a really special license. That's really deep.
Yeah, it's quite a marvel of engineering for them to have built that.
I guess so many of the train systems really are marvels of engineering if you think about it very long.
They really are.
So that's also called the channel, is that correct? The channel and the tunnel. So the channel. Yeah. So I guess that's the same route.
Yeah. Okay. And it will be it will leave from the King's Cross or St. Pancras station in London and arrive at this station in Paris, which I'm not going to attempt to pronounce. Now, Hazel, you mentioned that the Orient Express was one that you would be interested in riding.
Yeah, it just seems kind of like a mystery. And there's been some books and movies about mystery on the Orient Express.
Yeah, I love that movie. I watched that movie and I have told so many people, just the picture, just the video itself was so breathtakingly beautiful as they did this footage of the Orient Express and what they were going through. I was so glad I saw that movie in the theater with the big screen, because to me the experience of just feeling like I was on that train and seeing that scenery was so amazing. After having seen that, I would love to ride on that train, even though of course that in that movie there was a murder on the train, but I don't think that happens very often.
Right.
So there was a book which was a classic, and then I think there's been several movies, and a few years ago it was redone.
Yeah. I think it was an Agatha Christie.
Yes.
So it was a very classic book.
Yeah, these books and movies, murder mystery novels, as they're called, they add to the intrigue, right? Now, intrigue's kind of an interesting word. How would you define intrigue, Hazel?
It's an intriguing word, and you think of mystery and just secrecy and interest. It just holds your attention.
Yeah, it's something that, if something is intriguing, it sort of lures you in. You know, you want to know more about it. So in its early decades, the Orient Express was the epitome of luxury travel, meaning if you thought luxury travel, you would think Orient Express. You know, it's something that, you know, embodies or is just this really great example of luxury travel. And I think I also would be very interested in taking a ride on this. But to be honest, and we should mention, we talked about the Eurostar being probably on the Eurail Global Pass. Apparently, the Orient Express is too.
I did not know that.
Me neither.
Huh.
Let's go.
Oh, man, let's definitely go.
You could do both in one.
I also think it's really interesting that it's still the original route. That's kind of amazing because, like we said, it's been there for a long time. And it's like, I mean, if the movie is accurate, we'd have to do a little research. I know sometimes movies take some creative liberties, but it seems like it's just like against like sheer cliffs at times. Like the scaffolding that it's on is just crazy. So I'm just really curious now. I'll have to look at that more.
So much fun. I love trains. And this actually takes us into the next route, which is one that I actually am quite interested in. The Trans-Siberian Railway. It goes from Moscow to Vladivostok, and it takes
Nicely done.
Thank you very much. It takes 7 days. All right, I'll be honest. I think this sounds really cool.
Yeah.
I bet it would be cool. In fact, it might be cold because that area is very cold, Siberia.
Oh dear, yes. So this is another historically famous railroad, and it apparently is the world's longest continuous railway. Clocking in, which is another word for like to measure something, usually when it has to do with something that has a motor, right? Cars clock in at a certain speed. This one clocks in terms of distance at 5,772 miles.
Wow.
Right, yeah, that's
about a third of the way around the world.
yeah.
Wow.
Oh, yeah.
I'm
no
terrible
joke.
at numbers with distances. They don't really mean much to me unless I can connect it with something. So like I said, with 150 feet below the in the ocean, I have to think about scuba diving, then I can give it context. And then I'm glad they gave me a context there. That just made that number much more exciting. I was like, wow, it's a long ways.
Me too. That actually helps me a lot too. So along the way, similar to the way that you go through 4 different biomes on the Qinghai-Tibet Railway, on this you'll pass through 8 time zones.
That's insane.
It is. And I guess depending upon which way you're going, you'd be going forward or backward in time, right? But Pauline, you were talking about wanting to have a train route where you can really take your time and take a few pictures. Well, apparently, according to our article, you'll have plenty of time to see the beautiful Russian countryside.
Sounds great.
Yeah, what do you think of that, Hazel?
Actually, that's another one that would be a lot of fun.
So long as the food is good. 7
That's
days
true.
on that train. I hope the food's good.
Oh, that's very true. It's very true. Especially for someone who does not eat meat.
That's right. I'm vegetarian, so I'd have to check into their vegetarian options on board.
For sure. Or just hit up a 7-Eleven beforehand and fill up on little fantuan, the little mushroom ones.
You think they have that in Russia?
You buy them before you go. You get them at the... Well, we've checked out 4 of our really interesting, really very cool train routes for today, but we have even more to see tomorrow, more exciting places to go. But we have run out of time for today. Please do come back and join me and my lovely panelists on April 30th to see the rest of the train routes that we can take around the world. But until then, I'm David.
Hazel.
And Pauline.
And we're saying goodbye.
Goodbye, everyone.